When we talk about doing hard things, most people assume it's simply a matter of willpower. They believe the difference between those who succeed and those who fall short is some extraordinary inner strength that only a few are born with. But that is a myth. The truth is, human beings are not wired to chase discomfort. Our brains are survival machines designed to conserve energy, avoid danger, and seek ease. This means every time you stand at the threshold of a difficult task, your mind whispers, "Stay safe, stay comfortable, don't go there." And this is where the battle is either won or lost, not in the doing, but in the meaning your brain attaches to the doing. Think about it. Every action you take is driven by two invisible forces, your desire for pleasure and your desire to avoid pain. These two forces govern every choice, every habit, every decision, whether conscious or unconscious. The challenge is that most of us have programmed our brains to label comfort as pleasure and struggle as pain. We find pleasure in the easy distractions, the quick fixes, the temporary relief. We associate pain with discipline, with consistency, with the grind. And so, when the moment comes to step forward into something hard, the mind recoils. Not because you can't do it, but because you've taught your brain that pain lives there. If you want to force your brain to crave doing hard things, you must change the labels. You must train yourself to see growth, progress, and mastery as the highest forms of pleasure, and view stagnation, mediocrity, and wasted time as the true pain. This requires a conscious rewiring of your mental associations. You have to flip the script. When the alarm clock rings at 5 in the morning, instead of thinking, "This is torture," you must learn to tell yourself, "This is victory." When you sit down to face the difficult work, instead of saying, "This is draining," you must condition yourself to say, "This is where I gain strength." The brain does not distinguish between real experiences and vividly imagined ones. It only reacts to the meaning you give it. That is why world-class performers often visualize the struggle as enjoyable. They rehearse in their minds not only the act of winning, but the act of suffering for that win. They learn to savor the sweat, the discipline, the repetition, because they have linked those experiences to triumph, to greatness, to fulfillment. Their secret is not superhuman willpower. It is the mastery of association. Now, I want you to think about something. Comfort seems pleasurable in the moment, but what does it leave you with afterward? Regret, guilt, wasted potential. That is not pleasure. It is hidden pain. On the other hand, the hard road seems painful in the moment, but what does it give you afterward? Confidence, strength, and the deep satisfaction that you earned something valuable. That is not pain. It is hidden pleasure. Once you understand this reversal, you can begin to condition your brain to seek the deeper reward rather than the shallow escape. This is not an overnight shift. It requires conscious practice. You must begin by catching yourself in the moment of resistance and asking, "What am I really running from? Is it pain or is it growth?" Each time you choose to associate struggle with reward, you weaken the old wiring and strengthen the new. Over time, the balance shifts. What once felt like unbearable pain begins to feel like an opportunity you can't resist. And then, a remarkable thing happens. Your brain begins to crave the very things you once avoided. Let me be clear. Discomfort will never disappear. The early morning will always feel early. The heavy weight will always feel heavy. The demanding task will always feel demanding. But the meaning attached to that discomfort will be transformed. Instead of interpreting it as punishment, you will see it as the price of admission to the life you truly desire. You will no longer ask, "How do I avoid the hard thing?" You will begin to ask, "Where is the hard thing? Because that is where my reward is waiting." So, if you wish to master your own mind, begin here. Retrain your associations. Teach your brain that comfort is the real enemy and that the struggle is your ally. Convince yourself again and again that the path of resistance is not pain. It is pleasure in disguise. Once you do, you will stop resisting hard things and start craving them, because you'll know they are the only doorway to the person you are meant to become. And remember this: comfort feels good now but robs you later, while struggle feels costly now but pays you forever. Choose wisely what you teach your brain to crave, because your entire destiny depends on it. If there is one truth about human behavior that cannot be denied, it is this: we will always fight to remain consistent with who we believe we are. Your identity, what you tell yourself about yourself, becomes the silent ruler of every choice you make. This is why two people can start the same journey with the same tools, yet one perseveres while the other quits. The difference is not talent, resources, or even luck. The difference is that one sees discipline as part of who they are, while the other sees it as something external, something optional, something temporary. The brain, by its very design, seeks congruence. It cannot tolerate a gap between identity and action. If you tell yourself, I am lazy, I am inconsistent, I am the kind of person who gives up, your actions will bend to match that narrative, even if, deep down, you wish for something greater. On the other hand, if you declare, I am disciplined, I am resilient, I thrive on challenge, your brain will strain to prove that declaration true. It will push you to align your habits with that self-image, because it is wired to protect consistency. This is why most attempts at change fail. People try to adopt new habits without adopting a new identity. They focus on what they want to do, but not on who they need to become. And so, after a few days of effort, the old identity reasserts itself, whispering, this isn't you. You don't really do this. And the person gives up, not because the task was impossible, but because their self-concept was never transformed. If you want to force your brain to crave doing hard things, you must build an identity around discipline itself. You must stop treating discipline as a chore and start treating it as your nature. This begins with language. Every time you say, I'm trying to be disciplined, you are telling your brain that discipline is not yet who you are. But when you say, I am disciplined, you begin the process of rewiring. At first, it feels false. Your actions may not yet match, but identity precedes action, and action follows identity. When you affirm your identity with conviction, your brain will eventually demand the behavior that proves it. Consider the difference between someone who says, I want to quit smoking, and someone who says, I am not a smoker. The first frames quitting as an external effort, the second frames it as an identity. Which person do you think is more likely to succeed? The same principle applies to every area of life. If you want to rise early, build an identity around being an early riser. If you want to work hard, build an identity around being relentless. If you want to embrace challenges, build an identity around being someone who seeks them out rather than someone who avoids them. The reason this works is because identity is emotional. It is not just a concept you think, it is a truth you feel. And emotions are what drive behavior far more than logic or reason. When you truly feel, at the deepest level, I am disciplined, you don't need constant motivation because acting in alignment with that truth becomes natural. You don't argue with yourself about whether to work or rest, whether to advance or retreat. Your brain says, this is who we are. Therefore, this is what we do. Building such an identity requires repetition. It requires you to continually affirm it, live it, and reinforce it through small victories. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, each time you act with discipline, you cast a vote for the identity you are building. Eventually, the votes add up, and the identity hardens into certainty. From there, discipline is no longer an uphill battle. It becomes the path of least resistance, because it is simply you being you. And here lies the greatest freedom when discipline becomes your identity. You no longer wait for motivation. You no longer chase temporary bursts of inspiration. Your behavior flows from who you are, not how you feel. And feelings, as you know, are fleeting, but identity endures. So, understand this. Success is not about forcing yourself to act against your nature. It is about creating a new nature. It is about becoming the kind of person who does not need to be convinced, because the decision was made long ago at the level of identity. Once that shift takes place, your brain will not resist hard things. It will seek them, because doing so is how it proves to itself that you are exactly who you say you are. Never underestimate the power of identity. It is the blueprint of your destiny. Change what you believe about yourself, and you will change every action that follows. Say it, believe it, live it, I am disciplined. And once that truth takes root, nothing, not fear, not resistance, not hardship, can stop you from living it. One of the greatest mistakes people make when approaching hard things is that they imagine the entire mountain at once. They stand at the bottom, look up at the towering peak, and become paralyzed by the sheer distance between where they are and where they want to be. The brain, in that moment, does what it is designed to do. It calculates the cost. It says, this is too big, too heavy, too overwhelming. And so the person never takes the first step. Not because the mountain cannot be climbed, but because the mind was never tricked into moving. The secret lies in understanding that your brain resists massive leaps, but it cannot resist small steps. It is intimidated by the idea of transforming your entire life in one sweep, but it is far more cooperative when the task is broken down into something manageable. This is why micro-commitments are so powerful. They are the small promises you make to yourself, so small that your brain cannot find an excuse to reject them. Yet when repeated consistently, these small promises generate momentum, and momentum generates transformation. Think about the power of starting with 5 minutes of effort, 5 minutes of reading, 5 minutes of writing, 5 minutes of exercise. Your brain cannot argue with 5 minutes. It cannot say, "This is impossible." It accepts it as harmless. But once you begin, something magical happens. 5 minutes often turns into 10, 10 into 20, and soon you've done far more than you intended. You tricked the resistance. You bypassed the fear of the mountain by convincing yourself all you needed to do was take one step. This principle is not about lowering standards. It is about lowering the barrier of entry. Because once you're in motion, the psychology shifts. The mind moves from "I have to" into "I am doing." And when you are doing, you begin to feel the satisfaction of progress. That satisfaction reinforces the behavior, and the cycle repeats. Before long, your brain begins to crave the very tasks it once resisted, not because the tasks themselves have changed, but because you associated them with the reward of progress. Consider the way habits form. Every habit, good or bad, begins with a small decision repeated until it becomes automatic. No one wakes up one day suddenly disciplined in all areas of life. Discipline is built brick by brick, choice by choice. Micro-commitments are those bricks. They may appear insignificant in isolation, but when stacked together over time, they form the fortress of character. The danger is that most people dismiss the small step because it feels too small to matter. They wait for the grand gesture, the perfect plan, the ideal conditions. But the truth is, it is never the grand gesture that transforms a life. It is the tiny, repeated act of consistency that builds an unstoppable momentum. Micro-commitments also reshape identity. Each small promise kept is evidence that you are the kind of person who follows through, and the brain stores that evidence. With each repetition, you strengthen the belief that I am disciplined, I am consistent, I do the hard things. Over time, these small proofs of action accumulate into a powerful identity. And as we discussed before, identity governs behavior. The beauty of this approach is that it creates a self-fulfilling cycle. You begin with an action so small it feels almost irrelevant, but that action creates a spark of confidence. That confidence fuels the next action, which produces more confidence. Soon, you are not climbing the mountain in one bound. You are taking one step at a time, and before you know it, you look back and realize how far you've come. This principle explains why momentum is often more important than motivation. Motivation is fickle. It rises and falls with mood and circumstance. Momentum, on the other hand, is built through consistent action, no matter how small. Once momentum takes hold, it carries you forward even on days when you don't feel like moving. That is the true power of micro-commitments. They make momentum inevitable. So if your brain resists doing the hard thing, don't fight the mountain. Shrink it. Reduce it to a step so small that resistance has no power over it. And once you've taken that step, take another and another. With time, the steps will form a path. The path will create momentum, and momentum will carry you to the summit that once seemed impossible. And remember, this greatness is never built in a single leap. It is built in small, deliberate acts repeated with consistency until the brain no longer resists, but instead hungers for the climb. Begin with the smallest step, and you will discover that the small step is, in fact, the first giant stride toward the life you are meant to live. There is a reason why so many people abandon their goals when the journey becomes difficult. It is not always because they lack talent or intelligence, nor because they don't know what steps to take. More often, it is because their reason for doing it is too small. When the only motivation is personal convenience, the moment discomfort arrives, the mind asks, "Why am I suffering for this?" and quickly looks for a way out. But when your actions are tied to something greater than yourself, something bigger than your comfort, bigger than your mood, bigger even than your lifetime, the brain finds new strength to endure. Purpose transforms struggle into fuel. Think about the people throughout history who endured unthinkable hardship and yet refused to quit. They were not driven solely by personal ambition. They were driven by a vision, a mission, a cause that transcended their own immediate needs. They saw their suffering as necessary, even noble, because it served something that mattered beyond themselves. This is the power of anchoring your actions to a higher purpose. It gives meaning to your pain. And when pain has meaning, it ceases to be unbearable. Your brain is not naturally inclined to chase hard things. We've already established that, but it is inclined to chase significance. The human spirit has always hungered to be part of something larger, to contribute to a narrative that extends beyond the self. If you can attach your daily disciplines, your hard choices, your sacrifices to a vision of impact, whether for your family, your legacy, your faith, or humanity itself, you will find that the brain tolerates struggle with far less resistance. Because now the hard thing is not just about me, it is about we. It is about a future that depends on whether you rise or fall. Let's bring this closer to your own life. Suppose you want to wake up earlier, study harder, train more consistently, or take risks in your career. If the reason is only, I want to look good, or I want more money, your brain will betray you the moment fatigue sets in. But if you say, I am building a future my children will inherit, or I am creating a legacy that will outlive me, suddenly the early mornings and late nights are no longer burdens. They are responsibilities. They become sacred duties. You are not just acting for yourself, you are acting for those who depend on you, those who may never even know your name, but whose lives will be shaped by the choices you make today. Purpose has the unique ability to make the impossible possible. A soldier who would never run 5 miles for personal health will run through fire to protect his brothers in arms. A mother who may doubt her strength in ordinary times will lift extraordinary burdens when her child's safety is at stake. Purpose activates reserves of strength you didn't know you had, because it shifts the focus away from self-preservation and onto something that feels worth any sacrifice. This is why those who rise to greatness rarely speak only of themselves. They speak of service, of contribution, of duty. They understand that the deepest satisfaction does not come from comfort, but from sacrifice. And they learn to crave hard things, not because the difficulty itself is pleasurable, but because it is through that difficulty that they fulfill their purpose. So the question you must ask yourself is this: what is my higher purpose? What vision? What cause? What mission can I tie to the hard things I must do? Because once you answer that, the resistance in your mind begins to weaken. The tasks that once felt heavy take on new meaning. You begin to see your struggles as stepping stones toward a greater destiny. And when you stumble, when fatigue whispers its temptations, you remind yourself, I am not just doing this for me, I am doing this for something greater. That thought alone can carry you through storms that would otherwise break you. Never forget, the brain may resist pain, but the soul resists insignificance. Anchor your actions to a purpose greater than yourself, and you will discover that the hard things no longer feel like chains, they feel like wings. And let this truth sink in. Comfort will always serve the self, but purpose will always serve the world. Choose purpose, and every hard thing you endure becomes not just bearable, but meaningful. We often assume that people who thrive on difficulty are simply different from us, that they are born with a rare kind of grit or forged from some special metal that the rest of us don't possess. But that is not the truth. The truth is that what looks like natural toughness is nothing more than adaptation. Just as a muscle grows stronger when exposed to resistance, the human brain grows more resilient when consistently exposed to challenge. What feels unbearable in the beginning eventually becomes ordinary, and what feels ordinary eventually becomes necessary. Hard things repeated often enough cease to feel like punishment and begin to feel like home. This is one of the great secrets of human nature. Repetition reshapes perception. At first, the brain resists every act of discipline, every uncomfortable choice, every stretch beyond what is familiar. It screams, stop, this is not safe, this is not pleasant. But the more you repeat the act, the quieter that voice becomes. The brain learns to normalize the struggle, to expect it, to integrate it into the rhythm of life. This is why athletes can train for hours a day, why entrepreneurs can endure years of setbacks, why artists can spend countless nights refining their craft. What would overwhelm most people becomes their standard, simply because they train their minds to live there. You must understand, the brain is not static, it is dynamic, rewiring itself according to what you repeatedly demand of it. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, but you don't need a scientific term to know its power. You've seen it in your own life. Think back to the first time you tried something difficult, whether it was learning a skill, starting a job, or entering a new environment. At first, it felt awkward, uncomfortable, maybe even unbearable. But over time, through repetition, it became second nature. What once intimidated you now feels effortless. This same principle applies to every hard thing in life. And here lies the key: if you avoid hard things, your brain adapts to ease. It grows soft, fragile, allergic to discomfort. The smallest obstacle feels like a mountain because you've trained yourself to expect comfort. But if you consistently expose yourself to challenge, waking early, choosing discipline over distraction, pushing through resistance, your brain adapts in the opposite direction. It becomes hungry for challenge, conditioned to see difficulty as normal. Hardness becomes habit. And once it becomes habit, it no longer feels like suffering. It feels like the natural state of being. The danger for most people is that they never push through the initial discomfort long enough to experience this shift. They give up in the early stages, believing that the resistance they feel will always be there. But it won't. Resistance weakens under repetition. Just like the body stops aching after weeks of consistent training, the mind stops recoiling from difficulty after weeks of consistent exposure. The task itself may not change, the weight remains heavy, the work remains demanding, but your brain changes. And when the brain changes, everything changes. Think about the implications of this. Every time you choose the harder path, you are not just completing a task, you are conditioning your mind. You are teaching it to endure, to stretch, to crave more. Each repetition is a vote for the identity of someone who thrives on challenge. And just as repetition of weakness creates weakness, repetition of strength creates strength. What you repeat, you become. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single burst of effort will not rewire your brain, but small, repeated acts of discipline compound into a powerful transformation. Over time, they build a mental toughness that cannot be faked because it has been earned through thousands of choices to embrace the harder way. So, if you want your brain to crave hard things, do not wait for inspiration. Train it. Expose it daily to the resistance it wants to avoid. Refuse the easy path, not once, but again and again until the refusal itself becomes automatic. Then you will notice a shift. The things that once felt impossible will feel normal, and the things that feel normal now will feel insufficient because your brain will demand greater resistance to grow. And that is the point. The hard things never get easier. You get stronger. The more you repeat them, the more natural they become, until one day you realize that what once broke you now builds you. So remember, this discipline is not a gift you wait for. It is a muscle you train, and like every muscle, it grows only under resistance. Train your brain to expect the hard path, and soon the hard path will feel like the only path worth taking. There is a fundamental truth about the human brain: it repeats what is rewarded. If you want to teach it to crave hard things, you must make sure it tastes the sweetness of victory each time you overcome resistance. Too many people complete a difficult task and immediately move on, barely acknowledging what they've accomplished. In doing so, they rob their mind of the emotional payoff, the inner satisfaction that transforms effort into desire. The brain is like a child. It must be praised, reinforced, celebrated if it is to repeat the behavior with enthusiasm. Think back to the last time you achieved something that once felt impossible. Maybe it was completing a project, reaching a fitness milestone, breaking a bad habit, or standing firm in the face of fear. Do you remember that surge of energy, that quiet pride, that deep exhale of, "I did it"? That is not a random feeling. That is your brain flooding you with dopamine, the neurochemical of reward, designed to make you want to repeat the behavior that led to the victory. It is your mind's way of saying, "Yes, do that again." But here is the tragedy: most people cut that cycle short. They rush past the victory without fully absorbing it, and in doing so, they weaken the link between effort and reward. If you want to build a brain that craves hard things, you must learn to pause at the end of each struggle and savor the feeling of triumph. You must let yourself feel it fully, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Take a moment to breathe it in, to recognize the strength it took, to see yourself as the kind of person who overcomes. This is not vanity. It is reinforcement. It is psychological conditioning. Every time you honor your own effort, you teach your brain to associate discipline with pleasure. And what the brain associates with pleasure, it begins to seek out. This practice creates a loop. Struggle leads to effort. Effort leads to victory. Victory leads to reward. Reward leads to craving. And craving leads you back to struggle, but this time with less resistance, because your brain remembers that the climb was worth it. Over time, the loop strengthens until it becomes self-sustaining. You no longer need external rewards. No applause, no recognition, no validation, because the internal reward is enough. You learn to chase the satisfaction itself, the deep inner knowing that you did what was difficult and came out stronger. It is important to understand that this satisfaction is different from comfort. Comfort is fleeting. It disappears as soon as the moment passes, leaving you unchanged. Satisfaction, on the other hand, is enduring. It imprints itself on your self-image. It tells you, this is who I am. I am the kind of person who faces difficulty and prevails. That identity becomes a wellspring of confidence. And with confidence, the next hard thing feels less intimidating. Consider this: every time you finish a difficult task and celebrate it, you cast a vote for the belief that you are capable. You reinforce the narrative that you are disciplined, resilient, unstoppable. Each vote strengthens your identity, and as identity solidifies, behavior flows naturally. The more victories you acknowledge, the more your brain hungers for new ones. Soon, difficulty itself becomes exciting because it promises another chance to experience that powerful sense of victory. This is why so many high achievers seem addicted to the grind. They are not masochists who enjoy suffering for its own sake. They have simply conditioned their brains to link struggle with the sweetness of reward. They chase that feeling of triumph the way others chase comfort. But unlike comfort, triumph expands them, elevates them, transforms them. So if you want to rewire your brain, make this a practice. When you complete a hard thing, do not rush on to the next task. Stop, reflect, feel the weight of what you've done. Give yourself permission to experience the reward. Let your brain know that this satisfaction, this quiet pride, is the real pleasure. Because once it knows that, it will no longer resist difficulty. It will crave it. And here is the truth I want you to carry with you. The reward for doing hard things is not just the achievement itself. It is who you become in the process. Celebrate every victory, no matter how small, because each one is proof that you are no longer the person who avoids difficulty. You are the person who seeks it. And once your brain believes that there is no mountain too high, no obstacle too great, no challenge too heavy, remember this: comfort rewards you with nothing, struggle rewards you with everything. Choose struggle, celebrate the victory, and let your brain learn to hunger for the climb.